And there he was, Terence Johnson. Had I been a cartoon, my jaw would have hit the floor like an anvil, and my tongue would have uncoiled to his feet. He was the most handsome man I had ever seen. More than this, he was the most beautiful human I had ever laid eyes upon. Words are insufficient here. We've all been staggered in the face of something beautiful, and so stood I, gawking, blank-faced, unable to speak. He smiled, and it was as if the sun had poked its head through the clouds and cast a single, brilliant beam upon the shadowed earth. Terence stepped forward in one graceful stride and held out his hand. His fingers were long, fashioned for precise work, his palm a striking shade of pink. "Hello, buddy." People tend to flinch when they see me for the first time. Their noses cave back into their faces, their eyes go wide, and their features go dumb as they struggle to comprehend my bizarre construction. I'm visually poisonous. Their eyes want to spit me out. This didn't happen with Terence. Not a twitch. His smile held fast. I looked into his eyes. They were almond-shaped. The irises were colored like tea leaves, and the whites shimmered, truly shimmered, like mother of pearl. I was a little off on some of my breath there.
No, that's great. What you've just heard is the voice of Nick Yetto reading from his novel, his first published novel, and we're going to talk about that book and about Nick. So welcome.
Yeah, thank you.
I'd like to just ask, I know when I talked to you before, you said you always wanted to be a novelist. Why? What is it about being a novelist that is important?
There's the overarching just idea that that's one of the great artistic accomplishments. You know, so if you are surrounded by creative people and want to be one yourself, even to this day, that perhaps the importance of the novel has diminished in the society now, but it was always a grand prize to do, and it remains so. People are still really strive to publish their novel, and but as a creative kid, it was always my first best skill, writing. So yeah, it was just always the thing I wanted.
Yeah, nowadays everybody wants to be a screenwriter, but a lot of this novel struck me like it could be a screenplay. You know, there's so much dialogue in there.
Yeah, skipping ahead, it already is.
Oh,
but I don't
tell
want
us
to
about
jump.
that.
So you can see the blurb on the front, that the Jonathan Ames blurb on it.
And this is the best book I've read in years.
Which is a nice blurb.
Yeah, it is.
A long story short on that one was that I had to reach out myself for those blurbs in the back, and Christopher Moore, the great comedic novelist, gave one. And Jonathan Ames is my sort of creative hero.
He has the television series Bored to Death.
Yes,
yeah.
And he also did Blunt Talk with Patrick Stewart.
Oh, yeah.
Which was on Starz. So when I reached out to him to request the blurb for the book, I didn't expect anything to come of that. I didn't expect him to respond, but he did. And at that time, someone in Hollywood was expressing interest in optioning the rights to this book. This is not to suggest that the book is any kind of success, just that, you know, it's the intellectual property of the book might be interesting to option and perhaps be used in some way. I really wanted a crack at writing the screenplay of my own work, and spoke to Jonathan Ames about that as we were really just discussing him doing a blurb for the book. Maybe he could, maybe he couldn't. But a friendship did develop there. I got to meet him in New York, and for the past 18, 19 months, he mentored me through the process of writing a screenplay. And that was one where, when you're given that opportunity to work with really your creative hero, and a person that just 2 years ago, my wife and I were rewatching and watching Bored to Death again, and I love Jonathan Ames. I can't wait for his next show. Can't wait for his next book. To have that become a thing that now you're working with him, and I didn't want to screw that up. So really went nose to the grindstone, because I've never written a screenplay. In college, communications school, Ithaca, had messed around with it a little bit in classes, but that was just juvenilia stuff. So you're being asked now to have the possibility to work with this person and have him mentor you. and you don't want to blow that. So for every draft he got, I would work 16-hour days, and I would have written 5 drafts. And I actually have a picture somewhere of the stack of them and like the stacks of revisions. But it would seem that I did an okay job, because that's been a dominating thing in my life, and just hanging above my head is that the screen project, the screen version of this, has advanced, and there's a major star attached. I will not mention who that is. Discretion is advised, but that's been the heavy weight.
How exciting! Because so much of it reads, you can visualize it as you're reading it, and there's so much dialogue in there that's just like the script is already written. So
yeah, it feels that way, and some of it was kind of pulled directly from there. But you learn how quickly, from a first draft of writing a screenplay of the book you wrote, how much different structure-wise it has to be. Mm-hmm. That's a big learning curve, and how hard scenes need to terminate, how they have to end on this upbeat, and pacing is quite a bit different. But no, I mean, yeah, it was helpful that the dialogue portions in there, I think, are strong in the novel and could be pulled. A lot of funny jokes. The joke writing is the hardest.
Well, so tell us about how you develop the character. I'm just going to read, it's a first-person narrative from the point of view of Buddy Hayes. And he writes, or you write in his voice, I'm a connoisseur of the unwanted, a sommelier of deformity, a coveter of the unloved. I am forever chased by the shadow of my ugliness. In darkness, no shadow remains, and it's all diamonds. So how did you develop him as a character, and why did you make this man who is small and has scoliosis and considers himself very ugly to be the center of your novel?
I thought that was an interesting main character, sort of, and it's in the picaresque tradition. I think that the book is most strongly compared to Confederacy of Dunces, and that's there. Although I hadn't read Confederacy of Dunces until maybe I was a couple of years into it. The thing to remember is that I worked on this book for 10 years, but it wasn't all. The first 8 years of that was me teaching myself how to write a novel and being like, oh, well, that's not working. I read this. This doesn't read like Vonnegut. Why? And so you go back and you just keep tweaking until you get it. So when it comes to Buddy, a picaresque hero is usually someone small and someone without a lot of power. And they have to find tricks and, twists to get through and to succeed in life as best they can. Buddy's a little different than a lot of picaresque heroes in that he's actually not lazy. Like Ignatius Riley in the Confederacy of Dunces is a very lazy guy. Buddy's very active. But when I started the first writings on this 10 years ago, towards the end of the Bush era, which definitely shaped that period, then most of the book written in the Obama era. So that kind of shaped it, and then kind of concluded in this era.
It's actually set in 2006.
Yes.
Right? Yeah.
Yep.
Also, too, the choice of this handsome black man. It reminded me. Did you ever read Leslie Fiedler's "Come Back to the Raft Again"? Huck Honey.
No.
He's an American literary critic, and he traced through how European works have males and females at their center coming together, and American works, have like Huck and Jim.
That's very
a
interesting.
White and a black, or
Yep.
Tonto and the Lone Ranger, an off-white, non-white person paired with a white person at the center. And it
I'd
seemed
never
to
thought of
follow
it,
that
but
same
very
tradition.
interesting.
But why did you make Terrence the...
So there's a couple of things there. When I started writing the book, Buddy was more of just a kind of screwed up version of me. And
really?
Yeah, he was tall. I described him as a walking erector set, because I'm sort of tall and dorky, and I was kind of struggling with the book. It just wasn't working. I had him living with his. I wanted to do this kind of awkward character who's not doing well in life.
But I'm just so surprised.
Yeah.
I mean, you're not ugly, and you are married with a wife and children. This is doesn't seem like you.
Well, no, it's the struggle of the I mean, everyone I think feels ugly at times, and I wanted to explore that. I also wanted to explore sort of male appearance and sort of the body dysmorphia that guys can experience, but it's really never really talked about. But when it came to Buddy, there was I was writing him, and he was sort of my size, and then I was listening to a New Yorker podcast with the cartoonist Mike Lupacek or something. He did the famous cartoons of George Bush, where, if you remember, the New Yorker cartoons, where in the beginning he drew Bush as a pretty normal caricature, but as time wore on, it got smaller and smaller, and the ears got bigger.
Yeah, sir.
Get to the end, he was like a little rat. And that, when I heard that, I was like, that's it. I have to take this guy and squish him and twist him. And then you get sort of more into the Quasimodo world, and you're like, oh, okay. And then with Terrence, you asked about.
But Esmeralda is a female, and Terrence is a male.
Right. So, and then when you discover Terrence, well, who's going to be the antagonist, I guess, in this? And you're looking at that area of Troy. And in this time, we were feeling really, when I started the book, everyone was feeling pretty hopeful about the course of, social relations and where we were at. It's almost impossible to recall that feeling. But I kind of, coming from that background and living down there in Troy, just in certain pockets, you'd hear that all is not well. And it just dawned on me as I'm working on it. It's like, yeah, Buddy would be a little racist, I think. That's what this guy would be. And then you struggle with that. Do I want to do that? What would be a thing that would really throw him off? And so the thing that I think is more important is that Terrence is super handsome, very attractive, and Buddy feels very unattractive. And by all measures, he is unattractive. That's another thing that sometimes you can't gloss it over.
And just so our listeners know how they come together, Buddy lives alone with his mother and his grandfather, who is missing his legs, in need of nursing attention, and Terrence is a nurse who comes into their home.
Yep.
So what also interested me is, as a narrative, how you, and it reminds me, talk about picaresque, like Tom Jones, you address the reader. You say several times in the midst of whatever, you say, and reader.
Yeah.
One that comes to mind is there's the alluring librarian, and she's wearing her pencil thin jeans, and there's a rip, as there often is in these modern clothes, for her knees, and what do you call them? What do you call them? It's very funny what you call them. Hold on, I even wrote it down.
Is it the fertile roundness of the kneecap
or
something?
Yes, that's it. And then you go on this whole little thing saying, the fertile protuberance, that's it. Yeah. And you say, I know, readers, I know. And then you go on this whole little sidekick about how a male knee could get together with a female knee and have all these little knees. It's just like this idea of addressing the reader in the middle of the narrative. Where did that come from? Why do that?
I'll say to people that will ask me, about writing, that one of the ways that you can make it compelling is to sort of lean across the table or at the bar and say, hey, something I want to tell you. I mean, think of the best storytellers in your life. And there's always that sort of eye contact, that lean in, come here, I want to tell you. And there's actually an aspect of it, I just told you what I'm supposed to tell you. Hey, now I'm going to tell you the truth about this. And there's just sort of a comedic balance there, and something to the rhythm of it. Also, it lets you sort of do an aside without doing the footnote. I was in, David Foster Wallace is a huge influence to me, and he did a lot of footnoting. But I didn't think that, first of all, he killed it. So I would have loved to have done little Buddy footnotes here and there, because he has so much to say, and he considers himself this great genius. But David Foster Wallace sort of killed that. So so it sort of does the aside. It is Shakespearean aside in a way. And in the earlier passage I read, you said these short little sentences. Well, that's the thing you try to do, because when he sees Terrence, right?
It's like heart-stopping.
Yeah.
And you echo that in the language. I love that scene.
So with rhythms and stuff too. And sometimes that turn to the reader, hey reader, that'll be a break in the rhythm of the previous paragraph, where I would have done a really ornate paragraph where he's really showing off how bright he is, and then he kind of breaks it down and it gets a little bit more down and dirty. Just a comedic touch.
Yeah, well, the things I love are the way you develop the relationships, particularly his relationship with his grandfather. And one of my favorite scenes is he's just noticed pubic hair. It's a flashback to his childhood.
Yeah.
And he can't talk to his mother about it. So he goes to talk to his grandfather. And the grandfather goes up to the bookshelf and like pulls out Lolita and Portnoy's Complaint.
Yeah.
And, it's like a literary answer to this very basic physical sort of typical parental birds and bees talk. But you said you drew on your own life for this. Did you come from like a very literary family? Is that something?
No.
No?
My parents certainly encouraged me to pursue things, but I was more a theater kid.
Uh-huh.
But, so sort of working with prose, and attended the New York State Theater Institute at Russell Sage, and all of that. And so in that way, Terrence is based on me too, because he's sort of a thwarted artist, a thwarted performer where life got in the way. For me, more my own self-confidence got in the way of pursuing that. And it's also a hard life. But your question was
about this incongruity of this 11-year-old, 12-year-old kid coming to his grandfather and reaching for Lolita.
Yeah.
It's humorous, but then I stopped to think, where did that come from,
Oh, so I think that was just sort of, I really didn't want to do that flashback, because whenever you try to write kids, they always end up sounding lame. So writing that was really hard, just because if you try to write back a child scene and try to write in a child's voice, it always is too not Huck Finney, but you know what I mean? It's
too cutesy.
Too cutesy a lot of times. So I kind of wanted to kill the cutesiness of that with my grandfather, and the Papa character is very much based on my real grandfather, my Grandpa Hammer.
So the Papa character is a World War II veteran.
Yep.
And you can tell by his hands that he's a laborer.
Yep.
And that's interesting, too, because here's what appears to be a working-class household in Ilium.
Mm-hmm.
And then at the same time, they have kind of these upper crust, not just the literary thread, but the garden tour and the various. Tell us a little about the setting, how you came up with that.
I live down there, and so much of it is that you just sort of absorb things as you go around, and they begin to hit you. I started with the character, found Buddy, and then just started to sort of shape his life and kind of try to picture what he would think and feel. And then, I don't know, some of these pieces just kind of clunk themselves on. I went on the Hidden Garden tour in Troy and saw like the sort of how serious people took it.
And the competitive element.
And the competitive element. I'm like, okay, so what's the comedy in here, and how would Buddy feel about this? And you really do spend, and you've read the book, so he's not necessarily a guy you want to spend a ton of time with. And it was sort of nice to be rid of him to some degree, because he was a figure in my head for so long. But you're just talking about the setting. Oh, and I just definitely wanted that whole family to be strivers. There was so much of that in there of putting on airs, because it's a reflection of Buddy's superiority in his racism, this sort of smug superiority that he has no right to. You have not earned any of this. Was important and I thought comedic.
Yeah, what you do with humor in the book is interesting, because a lot of times you're laughing with the characters, but sometimes you're laughing at the characters, and it's kind of a knife edge. It goes back and forth.
I definitely wanted to make him slippery. That was one of the things on my little notepad, is so like, because you want to bring a reader through all kinds of emotions. That's at least my view of fiction. There are differing views on what the purpose of fiction is. Really, is there any purpose? Does there need to be a purpose for it to be valuable? I don't know. But the idea here is that Buddy's talking to you, or you're watching Buddy and you're rooting for him, and you like him, And then all of a sudden he does something and you're like, oh my God. And you don't know if you like him. And then he kind of comes back and ingratiates himself to you again. And again he does it. So that's, I think, part of the comedy of it, which is just make him feel comfortable and then pull out the rug. Make him feel comfortable, pull out the rug. Was it the right way to go? I don't know. In hindsight, there's aspects of the book that, because I've gotten to write a screenplay, I've sort of had a second chance to do them. One of them is to give Terrence a stronger bite back at Buddy.
Because that's what I liked about the Terrence character in the book.
Yeah.
He just absorbs it all. And that scene that you read us, the opening here, he just, what is it? His smile stays. He doesn't. He just absorbs whatever Buddy throws at him, and he keeps on being magnanimous, and he keeps on trying to be a friend. And
I like that about him too. And I also just, if it's not on the page, the reader doesn't know it. Mm-hmm. So, or maybe they can find it between the lines. But in my mind, Terrence could see that Buddy was hurting from the beginning, and he wanted to sort of get him out of his shell. He kind of viewed it as part of his mission as a caregiver to the family, to sort of help this guy who's clearly struggling with a lot of things. The largest to me was that Buddy is struggling hard with the fact that his grandfather is not doing well, because that grandfather is such a figure of stability.
Yeah, and Terrence says that in the first time they meet and have a conversation, and Buddy diminishes it. I know, you see me as some grandson that needs help.
Yeah.
That's not who I am. Well, so when you construct a novel, and I think you said you're doing another one too. Mm-hmm. It isn't like you draw out how the plot is going to be all the way through. You work from the characters and let it grow from there? Or
that was for this one. I don't necessarily recommend it for anybody that's trying to write a novel. There's a lot of different ways to do it. As I've been working on a second one, I started to sort of plot it more.
And what's the second one about?
It's about the greatest con woman of the 20th century.
An historical figure?
A historical figure, yeah. But
Who is she?
Ruth Drown.
Gee, I never heard of her.
She was a disciple of Albert Abrams, the maker of, what do they call them? Sorry. Organ accumulators and sort of organ therapies.
Uh-huh.
And Ruth Drown created this device. She created quite a few devices, but the one that had the most impact was called Homo Vibra Ray, which was you send in a drop of your blood on a blotter, to their laboratory. I'm doing air quotes in Los Angeles, and then she would beam healing to you through the air using radio. So she was a quack.
What era was this in?
She started late 1930s, so 1939.
Oh my! Now, what interested you in her?
I came upon her because I was looking to do something with UFO nuts, and I'm a science fiction guy, and I love the idea of UFOs, and I want to believe aliens are out there, but I was looking into sort of the ufology, and I discovered a gentleman who led me to her, because this one ufologist found Ruth Drown very fascinating, and wrote about her, and that sort of brought me down that whole rabbit hole of looking into this, and I've been researching that for a while.
So, but this isn't a biography, this is a novel based on her.
I was thinking about doing it nonfiction.
Oh, wow.
But then have sort of moved more in the direction of doing a sort of a Hunter S. Thompson gonzo journalism thing, but flipping that and being like, I'm the gonzo journalist who will not explore these things. I will not leave the house to explore this. I'm just going to go into the archives, and because the whole thing is about truth and untruth and marketing and the lies we tell, and
I would say that's a very timely topic for this era.
That's what I'm going into. I in the proposal I've written for it, that is being considered by someone.
So tell us a little about how writing fits in with the rest of your life. I know you said some of this is autobiographical, and I thought, maybe the part about being a web designer, because you do that from home. But like, how do you fit this in with, like, what do you do as a writer? Are you someone like Hemingway that, gets up early in the morning and has a certain amount of time you spend, or how does that fit in?
I generally will just sit down, and when I can find the time between the kids and work, and then once I sort of I call it getting into the pocket, when all else drops away, and then you can find, if you had started at a time where you have the time, you can find 6 hours passed in your click, and you're like, whoa. And then you have to come back out into the world. Oftentimes it's when the kids come home or whatever. And it takes another hour, and you're walking around stunned. And the book is still, and the book and the characters and stuff are still.
You're still living that other life.
Yeah, you can. I think it's in the right brain because I can actually feel them hitting me there, like little pebbles, as you're walking around, and it takes you a while to come out of it and sort of readjust to the world that we live in.
So is your wife supportive of this process?
Sure.
Oh, that's good.
Although I think sometimes when I'm in the haze, she'll say something to me, and like I'll be looking at her, but she'll know I'm not there. Which I think is maybe a common thing that people experience in couples and stuff.
Yeah,
I'm sure I do it to her, and
Right.
blank stare. But she'll say, "Oh God, you're still in the book," and I'm like, oh, "Okay, I'm coming out." Yeah.
So did she like the book?
Yeah. I mean, we've been together now 15 years, and married about 10, 11. So I was working on that book the whole.
So she's been, it's a threesome.
Yeah, she's been there a
So
long
the
time.
book is dedicated to William B. Patrick, writer, mentor, friend. Who is he?
That's Bill Patrick, the writer of Saving Troy and Roxa and other great
So
books.
You've known him all
I was living in Troy, and I walked to the library, the same library that Buddy goes to in the book.
Oh, and that explains the stained glass windows.
Yeah.
I love that library.
I don't think that there's a Dante Tiffany stained glass in there, but that was the Divine Comedy was sort of a little better. But there is
that stained glass. It's of printers. It's of
I think
printers.
it's printers.
Yes,
and that's a real Tiffany window.
Yeah.
And so yeah. And one day I walked there and I saw this board for a writer's workshop, and I hadn't done any classes or anything since college, and I graduated 2000, so 6 years. And I attended it, and Bill was doing it. And that was where I wrote the prologue to the book, and we hit it off. And he kind of continued to mentor me, and remains today someone that I trust and someone that I can call. And I love the guy, and he's been wonderful to me. So, yeah, the book had to be dedicated to him because I couldn't have done it without him. And there were so many times when I was stuck, and he'd come in with just a great suggestion, and you'd chew on that for a while, and then turn the corner on that.
Well, it makes a difference to have a mentor. That's great. Well, also, too, it interested me, the relationship with the character Buddy and New York City, because in the early chapters, the Buddy character is pretending when he's getting business online that he goes into the city twice a month, and he's created this whole kind of persona about himself that isn't real in order to get in this business online. But then the ending, the very last chapter is, he's come out of his shell because he's become friends with Terrence, who's moved to New York, and to reconnect with his acting career after his mother's died, and invited Buddy to come, who hesitates and isn't going to come, but there he is on the train, heading for the city. So what is the significance of New York in that novel?
That's all about me, really. That's a theme for me because as a younger guy, I lived and worked in New York, and I really wanted to do that. But I could never feel comfortable there. I've got family here and roots in this area, and I tried to be there and to sort of, because I'm an ambitious person and I wanted to sort of climb that ladder and feel that success in a market like that. And I actually love New York City, but I just never could get comfortable. And I think people experience that, when you come from upstate or whatever. A lot of people, they love what New York offers, but you just can't feel that comfort. So moved back up here to start work on a book, but also just because, if I'm honest, I really couldn't cut it down there. I didn't feel comfortable. And so there was that thing.
So that is Buddy, yeah.
So it's that aspect of Buddy where, and there's a lot more of that in there than what I feel now, because now I have a family and things. So, but at the time there was this resentment with myself for not being able to feel comfortable about living in New York and really pursuing a career down there and things, because I just have so much comfort and love up here. So there is a little aspect of the ties that bind there. You can't be all things, and you have to make a choice, but sometimes those choices are hard.
Yeah. Also, what about Buddy's relationship to his clothes? He'll wear a bowler hat out to mothers.
Yeah.
He'll always describe, whatever outfit he's putting on in these, terms that are very specific. Tell us a little about that.
I just think that that's funny.
Yeah.
Right. And just to sort of have him gushing about these clothes. But the thing to note is that he's really dressing like a man from the 1950s in a way, but sort of an eccentric from that time. So yeah, just the eccentricity of his dress, the way he talks about it, and the fact that he kind of feels like he is an expert, but when he's judging, say, Terrence's clothes or the clothes of the people at Mother's,
which he does,
yeah, he's dressed in like a cashmere turtleneck and in like a leather jacket with a bowler hat on. So it's just funny.
Yeah,
and it kind of building these insular little worlds that we do.
Right.
And Buddy, more than anything, he's just amplified.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, we're almost out of time, but I'd like to end with the epilogue because it's a mystery to me. Could you just unpack the symbolism there? Buddy's digging and he finds a diamond, which seems like, okay, maybe his mother dropped a ring kind of thing. But then he's digging and he finds, was it an emerald? Then he digs and he's digging and he's digging until there's a new world that opens. Is there more that we need to say about that?
I know exactly what it means.
Okay.
And I've told people what it means to me.
Okay.
And they've universally said that is not what it meant to me. So I'm not going to tell you what it meant to me, because I've found that when people ask me about it and I tell them what I thought I was saying, they're disappointed.
Oh, come on. Tell us. Oh, tell us.
So the mystery on this one, I think, is going to be, and I'm not trying to be evasive or anything like that, but I think that that's part of the joy of it, is that in the end, that sort of final piece, because it really does end before it ends before the epilogue, right? We know what that Buddy's
on the train to New York.
Yeah, he's on the train to New York, and that life is going to go on. Maybe there'll be a sequel someday, if I don't know. But then that epilogue is really that's between the text and you. And that's going to be my answer on it.
All right, because that happens a lot with written words,
yeah.
Even in the news business. You write something that you think you've said one thing, and when it's out there, it takes on a life of its own, and it really belongs to everybody else.
And I do think that it is a thing that I'm proud of it. I'll give you this on it.
Okay.
I was wondering how I wanted to do an epilogue because Buddy mentions Moby Dick in the book.
Oh yeah, Moby Dick is a huge presence in this book.
yeah, but Moby Dick has this short epilogue by comparison to how long the book is, and it's a thing where without that epilogue, Moby Dick you'd be like, but that epilogue nails it. So I wanted to do that. I was chasing my son in a stream. We were wading in a stream. The mosquitoes were biting me, and that epilogue came to me in one shot. I took my phone and dictated it into my phone. And that was it. So I'll give you that.
Well, that's great. The modern writing technique.
Yeah, right.
I love it. Well, thank you so much.
Thank you, Melissa.
This has been fun.
Yeah, it's been great.